kind of lends itself.
After I kill Erie, then I'll be the only black person. What we did yesterday? I'm pretty sure.
The whole thing's like gone.
Oh, yeah, you couldn't catch nothing yesterday. Because I passed you in. Yeah.
You have to leave us.
If you get worse leave, if you want to sleep, I'm going to work. I get to run my $20 sleep that I just bought.
Objective chapters 13 through 16. 16. Where's Bob?
Alright, don't bring it over here. I'm gonna break it. Wait, it's already started. Who started?
And that gets on YouTube.
He gets to see my black hand. As if he don't know who it is.
Whole conversation about you being really black and I
So my hand's gonna be in it.
Dude, he really just put up it's talents.
Oh, you did that, Steve?
Man down.
You should turn to see me from that.
What?
Can you see me from the camera?
Yeah. I can see your eyes and your nose. You can't really see your face.
Can you scooch it down like this?
No.
Why not?
Why?
Because now I don't have to be in the video.
Here, I want to make sure you're on it more.
Push it the other way. Did you get it?
Yeah, I got it.
We got to this side.
Do you still see me?
No.
Can you move it so you can see me? That was the point. Can you see me over here?
No, we can't.
You can't?
No.
Is he lying?
I'm Abraham Lincoln, I don't tell lies.
Can you seriously see me?
We can't see you.
Then why are you laughing?
Because I'm funny.
That's what I laughed at.
See, that made you laugh.
I actually didn't remember it.
Yeah. And then I told you the next day, you were like, I had the money yesterday.
It's broken, but this would work.
Oh, that's strong.
How much you expected about it, guys, again? This is where it starts.
It's not good that we already started.
No, already home.
I might break it.
Steven!
It's already been 5 minutes, though.
My shoulder relaxing.
I can't get close.
There.
Next week I'm done. Wait, are you taking
I did not ask you that. This is right.
Where's Mike? Doesn't he hang out and do things he goes on an English?
No. I think the last time because I was talking
Okay, so light turnout today, which was unfortunate, but it does appear like this will be on YouTube. Probably tonight, so I don't know if it's going to echo like this. I guess it's going to. Let's see if we can put a little up. Now, for those of you that have not been here, is it going to echo like this all the time? For those of you that have not been in class, so I don't know how many of you haven't been there, on YouTube, and I'll put the link, if you don't get my emails, I'll put the link on the link section of the course page, and it will be a link, and I'll call it YouTube review sessions or something like that. And when you click on there, all of the review sessions and all of the classes will be on there. So yesterday's class, if you had me 4th period and you weren't there, or 7th period, you weren't there, or 3rd period and you weren't there, And you can go on there and see all of yesterday's class. You can go on there today and see all but the last 10 minutes of today's class, right? Because the tape ran out. Tomorrow's class will also be on there as well. So if you're not in class, you can go on there and watch those classes. Now, even if you were in class and you want to look at something that maybe that you want to see again, or something that you think is important, you can do that. This review session will be on there. So if you want to rewatch this review session, you'll be able to go on and watch that as well. Now, in looking at the chapters, I told 7th period, I came to kind of a discovery. I don't have the book that we are using at home, because there's not enough books. So I have a copy here at school, but I don't have a book at home, and the chapters are a little different. The chapters on the test are still going to be 13, 14, 15, and 16. But chapter 16 in your textbook is a discussion of the South and abolition. And we're going to talk about that in its entirety tomorrow. So there's going to be about 6 or 7 questions at the end of the test that come out of chapter 16. The rest of the questions will come out of 13, 14, and 15. Right? So you're looking at maybe 7 questions out of 16. And they're going to be about some of the things that we talk about tomorrow and other things that we don't. So, ultimately, I'm hoping that you read 13 and 14. 15 and 16 would, certainly, very beneficial to read. And we'll try to highlight some of the things that are going to come out of those chapters today. Now, if we go way back to the beginning of where the questions for this test will start, they start with the election of 1824. So the presidential election, if you have your notes there, the first thing that the test is going to be on is the presidential election of 1824. Now, this presidential election is after 2 terms of Monroe and following what we call the era of good feelings. In this election, it is distinctive because there are 4 presidential candidates. One of them is Andrew Jackson. Tell me something about him. At this time, it's 1824. One of the candidates is Andrew Jackson. Tell me something about him. Yes. He is from the state of Tennessee. He is a Westerner. Another candidate is Henry Clay. Tell me something about him. Henry Clay, the second candidate, tell me something about him. Clay is from Kentucky, also a Western state. Tell me something else about Henry Clay. Yes.
He was the Speaker of the House.
He had been the Speaker of the House of Representatives. He had fairly significant experience in government, and he was seeking the nomination or seeking the presidency of the United States. A third candidate was William Crawford. What do we remember, if anything, about Crawford? Anything at all? Does anyone besides the instructor? Go ahead, Cage.
He was a Jeffersonian Republican.
He was a Jeffersonian Republican. What state?
Georgia.
Georgia. Crawford also had another distinction. Crawford was the first Crawford was the last presidential candidate selected by the caucuses. Right? Remember, what were the caucuses? Remember we talked about the caucuses and, as a way of nominating candidates. The caucus, what was the caucus? This is going a little bit ahead of ourselves. But does anybody remember, what were we talking about when we talked about the caucuses? Does anybody recall? Beck, do you recall the caucuses?
It was...
No.
The conventions didn't.
The conventions replaced them, all right? Go ahead.
They were nominated by, the Congress, basically?
Yes, the caucus was the group of Republican senators and congressmen, the group of Federalist senators and congressmen who would get together and say, this is the person we are going to support for the presidency. So the caucus system offered the actual public no say-so in who the party candidates would be. And Crawford was the selection of the Republican establishment. The Republican establishment said that Crawford would be the man. And who was the last candidate? There were 4 candidates: Clay, Jackson, Crawford, yes.
John Quincy Adams.
John Quincy Adams. And English, what state was John Quincy Adams from? He was from Massachusetts. He was the son of the former president. And what position did he hold as he was nominated, or as he was one of the nominees for the presidency? He was the Secretary of State in the Monroe administration. Now, the vote for this election is taken. Whom does the Electoral College select as the president in this particular election? Go ahead, Cage. Well, it's kind of a trick question, isn't it, Janine? Did the Electoral College select Jackson? No. Why not?
Because he didn't have the 2/3 majority.
So Jackson got the most vote, but he did not get the majority of the vote. So the Electoral College does not decide the election. Who decides the election in 24? Go ahead.
The House.
The House of Representatives, who votes by state. Now, who wins that election? Go ahead, Grave. Who wins that election? John Quincy Adams. Now, how does that transpire? Didn't Jackson get the most vote and the most electoral vote? How is it that John Quincy Adams ends up winning that election? Go ahead, Pumpkin.
Henry Clay supports him once he realizes he's out of the running.
Yes. Henry Clay is out of the running and supports Adams, and we said that this made some level of sense because both Clay and Adams were nationalists. Both Clay and Adams supported the American system. Both Clay and Adams thought that the national government should use its power and influence to promote things like internal improvements, a national bank, protective tariffs, etc. So it would make sense for Clay to support Adams ideologically, even though they were from different sectors of the country. But the Jackson people accused Clay and Adams of striking a corrupt bargain. Why? Go ahead, Emily Stevens. Why? Why did the Jackson people accuse Clay and Adams of striking a corrupt bargain? Go ahead, Emily Stevens. Oh, yes. So in the aftermath of Clay using his influence to get Adams elected as the president, Adams made Clay the Secretary of State, which seemed to be the heir apparent to the presidency. So it seemed to many that Adams was naming his successor. And the Jackson people declared this to be a corrupt bargain. Now, Adams takes over the presidency with this kind of cloud of the corrupt bargain over him, and we said by all accounts Adams's presidency is not very successful. Now, it goes beyond that. What did we attribute Adams' lack of success to beyond the corrupt bargain? Go ahead, Jackie.
His vision was different because he was a nationalist and like how the country would be centralistic, and also like he wasn't a good politician. He was really quiet and having presidents.
Those are very good. Both very good explanations. What Jackie said, the kids did not hear you, Jackie, but I did. And so I will repeat it. What dear Jackie said was, look, first of all, Adams's vision for the country was inconsistent with the direction the country was going in. He was a nationalist, and he wanted to use the power of government to promote nationalistic ideas, building internal improvements and other things to build up the nation. The country was taking a more kind of sectional direction. In addition to that, he just was not a very good politician. He didn't have good political skills. Oh, speaking of which, I was thinking about this now. I failed to kind of announce this in class, that my dear friend Mr. Leland and I are planning, kind of this movie experience on Monday. So after school on Monday, 3:30, the Distinta Theater is Lincoln. $7, it's the matinee price. And the reason I thought about that is that movie is basically about Lincoln's skills as a politician. We talk about Adams and his lack of success because he wasn't a good politician. And, when I was hearing Jackie offer that explanation and repeating it, I was thinking to myself, well, Lincoln's success in getting the 13th Amendment passed, despite the obstacles in doing so, was that he did have skills as a politician. And what's interesting about that, and this is somewhat off the subject, is we don't always like it. When you watch Lincoln and what he does and the frustrations that people have, he seems to be inconsistent. If you join us for this movie, at 3:30 on Monday after school, you say, well, gee, that seems less than noble, in doing that. But he gets the job accomplished, and that's what Adams doesn't do. Adams is principled. I won't do this, and I won't do that, and I won't do this, and I won't do that, and I won't use the power of the presidency, and I won't offer anybody any jobs to get things done. That's not the way we do things, but nothing gets done. So Adams doesn't have a successful administration because he's out of touch with the direction of the country, and he's not a very good politician. And this leads the way for Jackson to become elected as the presidency. And we talked about the election of 28, how Jackson defeats Adams. And one of the things that we talked about is after Jackson was elected, his inauguration was noteworthy. Why? What happens in Jackson's inauguration that is noteworthy and also kind of embodies the spirit of what happened? Go ahead.
It had like the largest crowd ever for inauguration.
So a large crowd convened in Washington, D.C. to see Jackson inaugurated, and then in the aftermath of that, Theodora, they went to the White House, and what happened there?
They kind of stormed the place.
Yes, that's a good way of putting it. They stormed the White House and they made a mess, and it kind of symbolized the idea that the common folk had taken over the power of government, and Jackson was their champion. Now, once Jackson gets into office, there are lots of issues that they're discussed in your book, and that we discuss in class, and that you wrote about in your essay. One of them was rotation in office and the spoils system. What, Kandrak, do we mean by that? When we say the spoils system, rotation in office, what does Jackson do that seems to be a departure in that area? Now, dear Kandrak, I can barely hear you, but I heard you say the word replace, right? So he replaced civil servants. Now, civil servants are people that work for government in various capacities. I'm a postmaster, I work for the Treasury Department, I work as a clerk for the State Department. There was approximately 10,000 people on the federal government payroll. Jackson replaced 1,000 of them with people who were loyal to him. So a tenth of the civil service was dismissed and replaced with people who were loyal to him. He defended that as rotation in office, saying that more people should get opportunities for these relatively simple jobs. His critics called it the spoils system, argued that what Jackson intended to do was strengthen his own power and influence by making people beholden to him. And so he said that the spoils system or rotation in office was one of the reasons that the critics of Jackson accused him of sort of grasping dictatorial power. I'll make these people beholden to me, then they'll need me, so they'll follow me. Right? Jackson, of course, defends it as being further indications of giving the people a chance. Now, a big issue that emerges in the Jackson administration involves the issue of nullification. Eventually, the nullification of federal law by the state of South Carolina and Jackson's response to it. Let's start with this. What was the notion of nullification? Who championed it, and what was the issue that brought it forward? Go ahead, dear Belay.
States had the right to choose what was constitutional and unconstitutional.
So dear Belay has said that the notion of nullification involved state discretion in determining whether actions of Congress were constitutional or not. So what Belay is suggesting to you, to all of us, is the idea of nullification said that a state would be the final determiner of whether or not a federal action was consistent with the Constitution. And whose idea was this? Whose idea was nullification? Go, Jordan.
John C. Calhoun.
John C. Calhoun articulated, let's see about this. Let's see, Maggie, about this. John C. Calhoun articulated this notion of nullification in what tract, what publication, do you recall? South Carolina Exposition and Protest, 1828. He writes this essay in which he articulates this idea that, look, states have the final say-so in constitutionality. And he goes forward and says, Why, look, the way they can do this is if they believe an action of the federal government is unconstitutional, then what they do is call a special convention, and in that convention they debate the issue, and if the convention votes that it is unconstitutional, they can declare an act of Congress null and void within their borders. And then the Congress would have the kind of latitude to change it, and if the state didn't like Congress's response to their nullification, what then would they do, Matt? Secede. And secession is the ultimate states' right. So, I mean, to some extent, the idea of nullification would greatly enhance the rights of the states if you take it to the ultimate experience, secession. And so, why did Calhoun write this in the first place? What was nullification a response to? What act of Congress were they interested in? Go ahead, Bobby. Oh, the Tariff of Abomination of 1828, you say, Bob, which was a high protective tariff that was intended to protect the textile manufacturers. Remember we had that chart yesterday, how good that class? Well, we had the chart. Remember I showed you on the overhead projections, and remember how happy the kids were when I put the overhead? Were you there, Kronka, when we put the, you were not, you weren't very happy. Who was there? Taylor, were you there when we put the overhead, but you were not that happy either. Matt, were you there when we put the overhead projections up there? Beck, were you there? Well, then you remember how happy you were. Well, we put the overhead projections and we saw that these textile factories were increasing in corporations. Well, now, this protective tariff in 1828 was intended to protect those textile manufacturers, right? So the British couldn't sell textiles cheaper than them, and so people would buy American textiles and would protect them. And the South didn't like it. And they said, this is hurting us. This is hurting us in a number of ways, and we can't stop it because we don't have enough power in Congress. So in order to stop it, in order to prevent Congress from passing things like maybe down the road slavery, right, something dealing with slavery or inhibiting slavery, we want the right to nullify federal actions that we don't like. And this is what Calhoun articulates. And we talked about, you know, how this idea of nullification is actually implemented in South Carolina. That Calhoun and Robert Hayne, are going to eventually oversee, you know, a convention in South Carolina where the Tariff of Abominations in 28 and a tariff reduction in 32 are both nullified, and South Carolina threatens the Union that if any action is taken to respond to that they would secede. How is it that, who is largely responsible, would you say, for kind of settling the nullification crisis? How is it settled? And who is, Alex, responsible for kind of facilitating the settlement? Is he? Would you credit Jackson for you know, forming a compromise, or who? Yeah, go ahead, James. Henry Clay. It is Clay that encourages the South Carolinians to accept a tariff reduction over a 10-year period. It is Jackson that pushes for the force bill. But eventually, the South Carolinians do in fact rescind their nullification of the tariffs, but then they nullify the force bill. And the crisis is over. Who did we conclude was the winner? We didn't. We didn't conclude a winner. We didn't suggest that Jackson won or South Carolina won. It was subject to our debate, which was interesting. Oh, what was the force bill, incidentally? What was the force bill? Go ahead, Hannah.
Jackson wanted to force South Carolina
To use military force to enforce the tariff. That never really becomes applicable because South Carolina rescinds their nullification. Another issue in Jackson's first term that is significant is the issue of Indian removal. Now, Indian removal we did not talk about in class, but quickly, the issue in Indian removal was this, that the policy of the United States government had been that the Native Americans had to conform to white ways or they had to move. And so most Native American tribes did not conform to white ways, and so they moved, or were moved, west. Now, the problem was the 5 civilized tribes of Georgia and in the Deep South. You know, they had civilized. The Cherokee in particular had set up kind of an independent nation with their own alphabet, newspapers, cotton, plantations and slave owning and other things that were mirroring the civilization around them. Despite the fact that the Cherokee and other tribes in the South had kind of conformed to what, had been demanded of them, the Georgians and the people from Mississippi and Alabama wanted them out. And they took action to do that. And remember, the Cherokee and others appealed to Jackson and the Supreme Court to protect them. The Supreme Court basically said, look, Georgia, you have no standing here. You can't really, deal with that. Jackson ignores the court, passes the Indian Removal, or has Congress pass the Indian Removal Act of 1830 and facilitates the movement of those tribes from their lands to Oklahoma. And very, very much so at the end of this all, brutally, with the Trail of Tears. Another issue in the Jackson administration was the rechartering of the Second Bank of the United States. Why is it that Jackson did not like the Second Bank of the United States? What was about it, dear Theodore?
He thought that it privileged
So you are saying at the core Jackson's opposition to the bank was this notion of privilege, right? That the bank had a privileged position, a monopoly, a governmental sponsorship that gave the people who were involved with the bank an advantage that other people did not have. So he didn't like it, so he vetoed it. Was that the only reason that he vetoed it? I mean, he said, I don't like the bank, and so I'm vetoing it. Yes?
It helped a few, but not the many.
Well, that's true. That's an issue of privilege, so he didn't like it for that reason, yes.
They used paper money. He didn't like.
He didn't like paper money either, and that's also why he vetoed it. Yes, go ahead. Pardon me? He believed that it was unstable, I guess, on some level. But he also believed it was unconstitutional, right? So, I mean, there were a variety of reasons why Jackson decides to veto the Second Bank of the United States, involving, yes, its constitutionality. Now, it's ironic that Jackson vetoed the Second Bank on constitutional grounds. Why was that ironic? Go ahead, Valerie.
Because in Maryland versus it was already deemed constitutional.
The Supreme Court had already deemed the Second Bank of the United States to be constitutional in McCulloch versus Maryland. Jackson ignores that on some level and declares it unconstitutional. But constitutionality is not the only reason why Jackson declared the Second Bank of the United States, or vetoed the Second Bank of the United States. And in the aftermath of that, remember, he vetoes it in 32, runs for re-election, is re-elected against whom? Who does he run against in 32?
Is it Clay?
Clay, right, against Henry Clay. Defeats Henry Clay, and then sees that as a mandate by the people against the bank. So then he takes action to kill the bank entirely before it was due to go out of existence. And remember, that action involved him shuffling and then replacing secretaries of Treasury who would be willing to do his bidding. Oh, incidentally, what was the name of the Secretary of Treasury that eventually did do what Jackson wanted him to do? Sort of. Yes, go ahead. Roger Taney. The reason I bring that up is Jackson eventually is going to make Roger Taney Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And that's going to be significant. Taney is going to be Chief Justice of the Supreme Court during the Civil War. And that's really important. Now, because of Jackson's actions, which in some cases were considered to be high-handed, there was opposition to him. And the opposition to Jackson coalesced into a political party that called themselves the Whigs. Now, the Whig Party that now stood in opposition to Jackson's Democratic Party was diverse. Calhoun was a Whig for a period of time. Clay was a Whig. Webster was a Whig. What the Whig Party held in common was opposition to Jackson. Beyond opposition to Jackson, the Whigs were pretty diverse. In 36, when Jackson retired and Van Buren was running for office, who did the Whigs run against Van Buren? Does anybody besides Reber and myself remember? Go ahead, Reber.
I don't know.
Son of a gun, I thought he would know. I mean, Crumpy, you would think he would know, would you not? How about your ex-best friend Bobby? Who ran in 36 against Van Buren? Yes. Pardon me? Well, not the anti-Masons, yes.
They ran 4 candidates.
4 candidates. Why did they run 4 candidates? Go ahead, English.
So that Buren would get the majority.
Right, so Van Buren wouldn't get the majority. If Van Buren didn't get the majority, then the election would go into the House of Representatives. In the aftermath, Van Buren does get the majority. He is elected, but what hampers Van Buren's administration more than anything? More than anything, what hampers Alice and Barry, Van Buren's administration? Do you recall? Go ahead, Cage.
He just wasn't Jackson.
Yes, he wasn't Jackson. What else, Janine? Panic of 37. Jordan, what was some of the reasons for the Panic of 37? Do you recall anything?
The destruction of the second bank world.
Yeah, the destruction of the second bank may have contributed to that. The speculation, the pet banks, the expansion in the money supply, over-speculation, falling, agricultural prices. What about the Specie Circular? What was the Specie Circular? Does anyone besides, go ahead, Billy.
You have to pay all your debt for loans and hard money.
Actually, the Specie Circular only referred to buying land from the federal government. If you were going to buy land from the federal government, you had to buy it with hard currency, which was basically a national endorsement of hard currency against Jackie paper money, right? So the Panic of 37, the Specie Circular, may or may not have contributed to the Panic of 37. Now, while the Panic of 37 is transpiring, it is a part of a national kind of economic transformation. And the national economic transformation that's occurring is called the market revolution. And we talked about that a little bit over the past couple of days. We said, look, Jacksonian democracy and the Jacksonian era and the rise of the common man and the issues of nullification and the bank war and the removal of the Native Americans from Georgia and other places, these are all issues that are occurring. These are all events that are occurring. As these events are occurring, at the same time, there are significant social and economic transformations occurring. And we listed those. We put them on the board every day. For those of you who haven't been there, every day we said, look, urbanization, industrialization, westward expansion, these are all things that were part of this transformation, this market transformation, this market revolution. And really what's happening here is America's economy is transforming from being one in which most people earned their livings, took care of themselves by self-sufficiently. Most people met their own needs. They grew their own food. They made their own clothes. They accumulated the things they needed from their neighbors on the basis of barter. To one in which companies and firms emerged to sell products and produce products and sell them in markets, and people eventually worked for those companies and firms for wages. So people no longer met their needs by producing the things they needed, but by earning money in places and taking that money either by producing products or working for wages and buying the things they needed. That's the market revolution. And part of that market revolution is people moved to cities so that they could build businesses, and people moved westward, right? And we talked about, the transportation revolution that was associated with the market revolution as well. Now, we talked about this urbanization, and we said one of the trends of this period is that people move to cities in large numbers. So you get a rapid population growth in cities. Part of that was facilitated by immigration. And we talked about immigration that occurred during this time period, and we identified 2 groups of immigrants that came in large numbers during this time. And who were they? Go ahead.
The Irish and the Germans.
The Irish and the Germans. And Cage, tell me one thing about the Irish as they came in here in large numbers.
A lot of them are in poverty.
They were poor. Most of the Irish came, they came here because of the potato famine. They were impoverished people. Tell me something else, go ahead.
You're Catholic.
Yes, they were Catholics. And Catholicism was considered to be a dangerous religion to many Protestants. And so their poverty, their Catholicism, and the volume and the size and the number of people who came posed to some people a threat. What were the people that feared immigrants and wanted to keep America for Americans? What did we call them, and what was the idea they put forward? Yes. Nativism or nativists. Those people would be the nativists. The idea that America was for Americans would be nativism. How about the Germans? How were they different than the Irish? Go ahead, Jacob.
They're a bit more wealthier. They had more education.
Yes, the Germans tended to have a little bit more money. They tended to have a little bit more education. Why'd they come? I mean, was it always poverty? Besides that, yes, go ahead. Yeah, I mean, there was political, economic upheavals in Europe, fleeing conscription, other reasons, and they came here. The fact that they had a little bit more money, the fact that they tended to have skills, how did that influence their settlement pattern? Does anybody? Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
They had money, so they could afford to move like westward instead of staying in the cities.
Yes, because the Germans had money, they could afford to migrate away from the major cities where they landed. The Irish just stayed there, right? The Irish landed in New York and stayed there. They landed in Boston and stayed there. They landed in Philadelphia and stayed there because they had enough money to go any further than that. Whereas the Germans did. So they migrated into the interior, sometimes looking for farmland, sometimes moving to interior cities, setting up shops and other businesses, and they have, you know, an impact on the culture there. Now, besides immigration and urbanization, we said a big trend was industrialization. And industrialization was building and maintaining factories and producing finished products. What was the first kinds of factories that sprung up in the aftermath of the War of 1812? Well, we talk about the factory system. What kind of factories? Yes?
Textiles.
Textiles. And in textile factories, they made cloth. Where were most of these textile factories located from?
Northeast.
The Northeast, and in particular where? New England. Why? We didn't talk about this in class, but why so many textile manufacturers in New England? Part of the reason, let me say this, part of the reason was the Erie Canal. Now that's an interesting kind of explanation. What did the Erie Canal do to New England? Now let's think about this. Let's do the Erie Canal for a second. There's questions about the Erie Canal on the test. So what did the Erie Canal do? What two cities were linked together by the Erie Canal? Yeah.
Buffalo and Albany.
Buffalo and Albany, right? 363 miles between Buffalo and Albany, right? So it makes it less expensive to transport freight. The freight that was coming into Buffalo, what was it? In Buffalo, things were coming into Buffalo, and from Buffalo, they were going to Albany. What was coming into Buffalo? Think about it. What states surround Erie, Ontario, those lakes? Ohio, Michigan, Illinois. What's coming out of those states? What kind of products? Are they finished products?
Raw.
What's that?
Raw.
Well, it might be raw materials, but grains, food, right? You know, I mean, if you go to Buffalo now, it's still grains and food, right? That is the main crop or the main industry there. Processing grains and food. So now we got grains and food that we're producing in the plains there and out in the prairies of the Midwest that are now being transported along the Great Lakes and now across the Erie Canal, and they're coming and they're landing in Albany and they're going to the world. How does this affect New England? Think about this for a second. How does that affect New England? And why would that contribute to manufacturing? Any ideas? Valerie, do you have an idea? If I'm a farmer in New England, am I going to be able to compete with the farmers in the Midwest? No. So because I can't compete with the farmers in the Midwest, the farmers in New England looked for alternatives. And one of the alternatives that they found involved the textile manufacturing industry. So mills grew up in New England because manufacturing became, to some extent, a better alternative than agriculture. I mean, agriculture was never very good in New England. right? I mean, the soil was rocky, the winters were long, the summers were short, and so it makes sense if they're looking for something to do, that industry would be an alternative. The other thing is they had water power there in New England. They had rapidly moving streams and rivers that they could employ as power, right, to fuel factories. What city had the first textile manufacturing? What city, what town?
Pawtucket?
Pawtucket, Rhode Island, right? Now, this is on the test. Who founded it? Who built that factory? Pawtucket, Rhode Island, first factory, anybody read it? Say, Samuel Slater. Samuel Slater. There is a list of a couple of names on the test of people. Samuel Slater is one of them. Another is Eli Whitney. What is Eli Whitney? We all know. Oh boy, this is too easy, is it not? We all know Eli Whitney as what? Interchangeable parts. That's not what I was thinking.
The cotton gin.
Cotton gin, but I wanted to point out both, so thank you. Eli Whitney was the inventor of the cotton gin. He was also responsible for this notion of interchangeable parts. With interchangeable parts, what was he building? Guns, right? For the United States government. Now, okay. Does anybody remember reading anything about the Cult of Domesticity? The Cult of Domesticity. Now, I should warn you, the questions on the test come in the order of how the material is presented in the book. But when we did this unit, I kind of jumped around and tried to put things in an order that I thought made sense. The Cult of Domesticity is the veneration of the female role in the household, right? So veneration means kind of the support of, I don't want to say the worship, but kind of the admiration of the mother-wife in the household. Now, the reason the Cult of Domesticity is discussed in your text, and our connection to it, was this idea that during this time period, there occurred a separation between home and work. Different spheres. The work sphere and the home sphere. And the woman was the head of the home. And she dominated the home sphere. The mother, the wife. And the Cult of Domesticity put the mother and the wife on a pedestal. Now, one of the reasons was because of the separation of these spheres, which is an important thing. Now, the transportation revolution was something that we said was very important and an important part of our discussion. And again, we put these things in a different order because I thought they made sense in the order that we discussed them in class. But they're asking on your test in the order that they come in your textbook. So if you would happen to read your book, you would find they would come in that order. Now, in terms of the transportation revolution, there are four things that we mentioned as being kind of the innovation, the transportation innovation during this time. The steam engine. Oh, what name did we associate with the steam engine? Well, yeah, Robert Fulton. What was the name of his boat? Go ahead, Matt. What's that? No. See? Claremont. So Fulton's boat was the Claremont. Anybody have a year on that? 1807. Right? So steam technology and steamboats. What did the steamboats connect? What two sections of the country mainly? Steamboats connected because they let you go up the river?
North and south.
North and south, or south and west, right? You know, south and west, north and south because they let you go up the river. Besides the steam technology, there were turnpikes, right? Turnpikes and toll roads. And we didn't talk about this to a great extent, but that facilitated east-west transportation. More importantly than turnpikes and toll roads were the canals. And the canals, you know, proliferated. You know, the Erie Canal is the standard. What governor was responsible for building the Erie Canal? And what state, Abigail, was the Erie Canal in? What governor, what state? Governor DeWitt Clinton. We're going to go with the full name. And what state? Entirely. In the state of New York, right? The Erie Canal was entirely in the state of New York. I mean, the canal boom was short-lived. It was replaced by what other transportation innovation, Duncan? The railroads. How were the railroads superior to the canals? In what way? Go ahead, Jordan.
I don't know.
Yeah, go ahead, Beck. I mean, the railroads could almost go anywhere, right? Where the canals could only go in geographic areas that linked two bodies of water and had a particular topography, where the railroads could go anywhere. So it made it a better, more efficient system of transportation to link the East and the West. Canals, turnpikes, and railroads typically link the East and the West. The steam technology, the North, what are they, English, what are you doing up there? Why? I don't know what he's doing up there. He's participating in horseplay right now. But we did say this, that obviously the transportation system facilitated the growth of this market economy. Now, today, we got into a discussion about what all of these changes, how all of these changes affected society. And what we said today, for those of you that were not in class, the many of you that were not in class, we said that, look, problems came from these changes. Problems of crime, problems of vices, problems of violence, the changing nature of work. And the result of that was that people became anxious. But at the same time they were anxious, they were also optimistic. So this anxiety and optimism coexisted with people during this time and set the stage for reform. And we talked about a little bit how that transpired today. And we started on the board and we had all of the changes. And then we had all of the problems. And then we said, okay, there is optimism and there is anxiety, and that results in kind of people willing to take action to fix things in society, which presents this idea of reform. But we went further and said, in order for that reform to take hold, there had to be impulses, things that would inspire people to take the final actions. And we identified those two impulses, romanticism and revivalism. And when we talked about revivalism, we talked about something called the Second Great Awakening. Now, when we talk about the Second Great Awakening, what was it? We talked about it today. Some of you were there, some of you were not. What was the Second Great Awakening? Danielle Concho, what was it? Were you there today? What did we say? You were really, really close to me while we were talking about this. Yeah. Did it make a difference? Where's Jackie going? Why is she leaving? Where is it? Oh. Okay, Jack, you're going to miss this. You watch it on your own. Get your home. Okay, go ahead, Danielle. It was a religious revival that extended over a period of time, and it involved sort of these demonstrative ministers preaching these emotional sermons and attempting to convert people to a version of Christianity. And we said, remember, that the idea of the Second Great Awakening is that anybody could be saved. Who was the figure that we identified? Good, Rick.
Charles Finney.
Charles Finney. Charles Finney was this former lawyer who is going to be the central figure of the Second Great Awakening. He's going to preach these sermons that are going to inspire people to convert to salvation and then to be changed. And remember, Finney and others said that this conversion would take you from selfishness to benevolence. Now, we talked about the transcendentalism also as being a reflection of romanticism, and both of these impulses being there for reform or doing something. And we talked about three reforms in class, actually only two. We talked about temperance, and in terms of temperance, we talked about various temperance organizations and the different ideas and the diversity of the movement. And we talked about the treatment of the mentally ill. In talking about the treatment of the mentally ill, what woman did we identify with the treatment of the mentally ill? Yes. Dorothea Dix, yes. Now, there were other reforms in this time period. One of them was public education, and maybe you should take a look at that. Another of them was women's rights, and maybe that might be good, something to take a look at too. We mentioned a guy named Neil Dow, D-O-W, when we talked about temperance and prohibition. What was his role in temperance? We only mentioned two people, Lyman Beecher and Neil Dowell. What did we say Neil Dowell? Lyman Beecher was a preacher. That's easy because it rhymes, right? And he preached against alcohol consumption. Neil Dowell was also a contributor to the temperance movement. What was his contribution? Go ahead, Daniel. Yes, he was responsible for that law in Maine that made alcohol consumption illegal. So Dowell was responsible for that. We also talked about the Utopianists, or Utopianism. What was that? What was that? Utopian or Utopianism? Go ahead, Matt. Pardon me, what did he say?
Like showing like a perfect way to live.
Yes, the Utopianists wanted to show a perfect... What was the example that we gave? Brook Farm. And who was at Brook Farm? Hawthorne. There were lots of other utopian experiments that are mentioned in your book. There's a box, a two-page discussion of one of them. You maybe should take a look at that, right? Now, there's also a painting in your book. And in this painting, it talks about the Hudson River School of Painting. That's something else you might want to take a look at, the Hudson River School. Who wrote Civil Disobedience? And what did he say? Go ahead.
Was it David Thoreau?
Henry David Thoreau. And what was it about?
The way to live, I guess the right way to live.
Well, Thoreau said the way to live was the right way to live, but he also, it dealt with a conflict between two things. What was it a conflict? Go ahead, Carl.
What the government was asking you to do and your conscience?
Yes, a conflict between your conscience and what the government was asking you to do. What was the thing that the transcendentalists emphasized? Thoreau was a transcendentalist. What did they emphasize? To get in touch with intuition. What's inside of you. And self-cultivation. Emerson, Thoreau were the names that we associated with transcendentalism. Okay, there are 7 questions about abolition and slavery. Those 7 questions that we come out of the very end of chapter 16 in your textbook, those are questions that we will talk about in class tomorrow. So when we resume our discussion tomorrow in class, we will pick up with the 3rd reform. Remember we said we're going to talk about 3 reforms? This is the 3rd one, abolition. Abolition means the abolition or elimination of slavery. All right? Well, okay, well that's about the right time. You really know this stuff. You're going to do well on this stuff.
Take your time.
Where you go?
Take your time.
Where you go?
I'm gonna go chill.
Yeah, 4 o'clock.
Where is it?
You do what I told you.